Well, India will be hosting the G20 summit. This summit happens in September, and India, Brazil, and Indonesia are part of a troika of G20 countries that is part of the governance model of G20. With me is the Brazilian ambassador to Delhi to talk about the G20 summit and other things as well. So, welcome to WION. And my first question to you is India will be hosting this summit. It's a matter of few days now. How do you see the Indian presidency of the G20 grouping?
Okay, first and foremost, thank you for inviting me to this interview. I have only words of praise for the Indian chairship. I think India showed leadership and objectivity and a sense of that consensus building should be the underlying motivation of conducting such a presidency. So Brazil will have the luck of building on a very solid chairship. So I think that this is to our advantage as the next presidency of the G20.
You will be the next president of the G20 grouping. Brazil will be the next president. There will be an official handing over ceremony as
That's
well.
Correct.
So what will be the key priorities for Brazil as the chair of the G20 grouping?
Well, I think the first and foremost is putting at the center of the discussions of the G20 the three dimensions of sustainable development, which is economic, social, and environmental. I think that this has been now for more than 30 years the pillar of international climate law. And sometimes these three dimensions do not get addressed in a balanced way as we think it should be. I think a second priority would be advance the process of reform of multilateral organizations so as they become more inclusive, so that I think the basic interest and agenda of the Global South be mainstreamed. And third, I think, is financing, and then Brazil in this case would like to promote synergy between the Sherpa and the financial tracks in order to develop creative financial instruments in order to address the new realities of the developing countries, the Global South. After the pandemic, economic recovery has been quite uneven throughout the world. I think developing countries fighting budgetary tightness, difficulties in servicing debt, so debt rescheduling. I think new concessional efforts should also be included in this package of reform of the financial institutions, and also, of course, advancing the gender agenda, so that fighting for more balance in women's contribution to society, to the economy, and also fighting gender violence.
A lot of similarities in many senses. You have used the term Global South as well several times.
Yes, right.
Something that India has been also focusing on. So how do you see India focusing on issues like these as well, like of course Global South, inclusion of African Union in the grouping as well, something that has received a lot of support, especially at the Brics summit?
Right. You're right. I think that we are lucky because we have been having successive chairships of the G20. Indonesia, India, Brazil, and if I'm not mistaken, the next country would be South Africa. So I think it contributes to consolidate the mainstreaming the Global South agenda in the world discussion. So I think we are very lucky in having a string of emerging countries presiding over G20.
How hopeful you are, sir, for a joint statement during Indian presidency of the G20 grouping? Because we know there's a division in the grouping, G7 versus Russia and China. So are you hopeful that there will be a joint statement this time, because it impacts your presidency as well?
Well, I think that Indian chairship has been showing really expertise in trying to bridge those differences. Of course, they are challenging differences. Brazil I think perhaps will benefit from the efforts India has been making in addressing this divide. Perhaps we are going to reap those, the results of those efforts. But I think that G20 should focus, without prejudice of the geopolitical realities we are living, Ukrainian conflict, which Brazil condemned clearly in multilateral fora. But we should also see G20 addressing the great concerns of the majority of humanity. So we are hopeful that these bridges can be built over this divide.
So now moving on to Brics, you're part of the Brics grouping, India is part of the Brics grouping.
Right.
How do you see the summit outcomes, the summit that happened in South Africa, that had one of the key outcomes as the expansion of the grouping as well?
Well, I think that one of the main takeaways of this summit is certainly the expansion of Brics. I think that the fact that 30 or more countries have shown interest, concrete interest, in joining Brics speaks in and of itself. The fact is that we see countries looking for more multipolarity, more inclusiveness, having more interest in benefiting from new spaces or additional spaces of dialogue, of consensus building. So Brics offers to the Global South this opportunity. I think this is very important. And of course, Brics has been always and once again voiced its interest for the reform of the multilateral institutions of governance. And this is a key factor in attracting, I think, also the countries of the Global South. So for us, expansion, I think, strengthens Brics, updates Brics in the sense of being a group more prepared, with more clout, legitimacy to cope with the global challenges, which now are multi-global challenges, right?
So you were the Sherpa as well for the Brics grouping for Brazil. If you can talk about the conversations that are happening in terms of where does Brics see as well at a time of great geopolitical flux, how do you see this group being a factor of stability at a time when we see a lot of distress?
Yes. Well, I was a former sous-Sherpa of Brics for almost 2 years and a half. I think that the dynamics behind the closed doors, we can feel the true dynamics of the discussions, and they were, I would call these dynamics inclusive dynamics. Brazil, of course, discussions were also very intense, but at the end of the day, there was a common sense that consensus was the key issue, the key basis for maintaining the group together. So Brazil, for example, always could, at the end of the discussions of the negotiations of a joint statement, Brazil could recognize Brazil in terms of language and themes which were included in the joint statement. So I think that this Brics culture or Brics tradition of consensus building is very important in the days we live. And it shows also that the expansion of Brics, as I said before, shows also that the group has been able to update itself in terms of membership also, and geographical diversity for that matter, because of course we have 6 countries coming from Latin America, Middle East, Asia, Africa.
Now moving on to the bilateral aspect. So how do you see India-Brazil relationship going forward? How do you see this relationship in terms of its substantive portion of discussion? And also, are we looking at some kind of conversation on trading in the national currencies? Because this is something that India is really pushing. And also in connecting the payment systems of the two countries.
Yes. Well, let me just say, taking a step before I answer your question. You in your previous question, you said you observed that I was a former sous-Sherpa. I think the experience of being a former sous-Sherpa made me a firm believer in Brazil-Indian bilateral relations in more than one dimension. But I think focusing on the dimension you are interested in now, I think the two countries have developed throughout those 76 years, as a matter of fact, of bilateral relations. The two countries developed mutual trust. When you coordinate for 70 years and based on shared values and also common perceptions of global challenges, you develop trust. And trust is a key word here, I would say, is a key word. So trust plus the sheer size of both countries in terms of GDP, population, natural resources, biodiversity, and so on and so forth, I think make the two countries very strong, can make the two countries mainstays of the big global discussions when it comes to these very complex challenges we face these days. And of course we are very, as India is worried about maintaining trade flows open, and in this respect we voiced in our Brics statement our concern that environmental issues could be the basis for a next wave of protectionism. I'm not saying that environmental concerns should not be reflected in trade law, but when you bring in environmental concerns to trade law, you should also bring the principles underlying climate change law, being common but differentiated responsibilities, historical responsibilities for global warming, and we are not seeing those new regulatory schemes being developed by the developed world as really taking on board climate and environmental concerns as conceived and discussed in the climate change or for that matter environmental negotiating forum.
Essentially, the relationship hinges on many things. One,
right,
of course, looks like the defense relationship. In fact, even as we speak, the commander of the Brazilian army is here in India. So, what kind of cooperation are we looking when it comes to the defense relationship? And India is very keen when it comes to its own defense equipments being brought by countries, including Tejas and other missile systems. If you have any update on that, are you interested in Indian Tejas?
Yes, very much. What I can, of course, share with you, because these discussions going on are delicate, sensitive discussions, but what I can tell you is, as I said before, the basis of trust, based on a very long history of bilateral relationship, provides the basis of having a more profound discussion and relations in the defense area. Brazil has a strong industrial base. Of course, India has a very strong industrial defense base. And there are synergies which can be explored, and more than explored, with the discussions be reviewed. I think, for example, concerning airplanes, concerning missiles, and so on and so forth. So we think that these discussions in connecting our industrial defense bases, I think they hold lots of promise.
So we could see some kind of major, perhaps, buying from Indian side. But my last question to you
is partnership. The key word when it comes to our cooperation and relations in terms of defense, as well as in other area, I think the key word is partnership, in the sense we want to sell to India, India wants to sell to Brazil, but we want to be partners. I think that this is another key word here.
Partners, and both countries partners also in reforming the United Nations Security Council. If you can talk, that's my last question. Are you hopeful that one day there will be a reform and both Brazil and India could become a permanent member of a grouping that is stuck in the world of 1940s?
Yes, as you said, I think I couldn't agree more. The multilateral governance institutions are stuck in terms of structure and decision-making process in 1945, as a matter of fact. So if we cannot manage to discuss the reform of the UN system, including and most importantly the Security Council, we will see. We're afraid that we will see an international multilateral governance institutions more and more non-responsive to the great challenges of the world and not reflecting the majority of humanity aspirations. So I think it's very important. We are hopeful that this can be carried out, of course, perhaps not in the near future, but in the future this can be concretized.
Well, thank you so much, sir, for speaking
Yes.
to WION. It was a lovely conversation on various aspects, whether it's the G20, Brics, or the bilateral relationship. And for sure, given that Brics is the country that will be the next chair of the G20 presidency, it's bound to get international attention and also India's attention. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. No, thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you.